to, yeah.
So Shane and I sat down Bro Forum Denver last year thinking about presentations that we could do together, thinking about something interesting and relevant. So we came up with this presentation. Something else was happening in July last year. Can everyone know what happened? About 12 months ago. It's about to happen again in July this year. No. Windows 10 was released. So from my perspective, I thought Windows 10 was kind of an interesting thing to talk about. And we've expanded, it's not just about Windows 10, we've expanded the scope a little bit. It was interesting to think about what Windows 10 was doing with the new form factors, increasing the usability of over above Windows 8. So we came up with this presentation about managing a modern user experience in a hybrid desktop. And we'll talk about what a hybrid desktop is, but we'll start with, I guess, placing this conversation in context of the history of an enterprise desktop.
Who's running Windows 10? Really? In the enterprise or on your laptop? Or on any consumer device? Enterprise, anybody? Okay.
So if you're not running Windows 10, why aren't you running Windows 10? You don't like it? Prefer Windows 7?
Universal apps.
Not confident yet.
Not confident yet?
Not really.
Okay.
Yeah, so actually to set some context, who in the room is a customer? 1, 2, so about 4. And everyone else consultants?
Or vendors?
Yeah, or vendors, yeah, right. Okay.
So if you've not seen either of us before, my name's Aaron Parker. I work for a company, I'm based in Melbourne, but I work for a company based in Sydney. We're a small consulting firm. I've only been there about 5 weeks, but this presentation that Shane and I came up with was ended up being rather relevant for my new role. I work in pre-sales in the Microsoft and Citrix side of the business, so I'm doing a lot with Azure, Office 365, and the Citrix stack with things like ShareFile and things like that. And I've been having some conversations with a number of customers recently around Windows 10 and about actually helping them plan and get to Windows 10. So their comments around Windows 10 were very interesting.
Yep, so for those of you who don't know me, I'm Shane Kleinert. I work for Choice Solutions. It's based out of the Midwest, and most recently we opened up an office down in the Southeast, which I head up that region. And really excited to have Mr. Webster on board. Shout out to Webster. He's recently joined the team, so really excited about that. And my focus is in end user computing. And most recently, as Aaron had said, customers more and more as we go into customer environments, the conversations of identity and enterprise mobility management, these conversations are coming up more and more, specifically because the consumers are driving these conversations of what they're bringing into the enterprise and what they want to actually run on these enterprise desktops. So, it's going to be exciting to get into this stuff here today. So, CTP and a 10X NTT as well. So, do a lot with the community and excited to be here.
Yeah, I'm a CTP and a Microsoft MVP. I'm also a vExpert since February this year. I didn't find out till about 4 weeks ago because I wasn't checking my email.
So you're number 8?
I think so, yeah.
It used to be 7 of us.
It's 8 of us now?
Cool. All the 3 awards, so you're number 8.
Yeah, it's a pretty exclusive club. So we presented this session online on Virtual Expo 1st of April, I think it might have been. It was quite early in the morning for me, and I'm lucky we actually checked the time zone differences.
30th of March.
30th of March. Well, 1st of April for me. Lucky I did check the time zone before the presentation. Otherwise, I would have got up an hour later and probably missed it.
Time or something like that. It was pretty early.
No, it wasn't that early. I did get more sleep than I did last night. So we have some objectives that we're going to try and get through in this presentation in the 15 minutes that we've already gone through our intro. So we'll talk a little bit about the enterprise desktop and what we see as a transition to the hybrid desktop. We'll explain what the hybrid desktop is. Both of us have been working with hybrid desktops for some time now, so we'll talk about our experiences. Then we'll define the hybrid desktop and some scenarios, and then talk about managing the user experience on hybrid desktop, and then finally wrap up with some gaps and challenges. So the enterprise desktop, what is it? I need to check my notes here, actually. Do you want to take this one?
Yeah, sure. So I think the enterprise desktop is something that we're all here today. We're all familiar with the enterprise desktop, right? It's something that's tightly controlled in the enterprise, right? When you think of the enterprise desktop, it's something that encompasses. Well, why don't we just kick up to the next slide and kind of walk through it? But basically, the enterprise desktop is something that's tightly controlled, right? It's something that is typically domain joined, something that's we changed this up. Yeah. So basically, the enterprise. The point of that conversation is to give you guys some context about the enterprise desktop, and so it's typically something that's tightly controlled and managed, and it's something that has standardized images, right? So something that you would typically enterprise desktop is domain joined as well, right? So it's typically domain joined, runs Windows. So, I mean, we see how many people are on Mac in the enterprise today. Yeah.
Domain joined Mac?
Domain joined, yeah, that's a good question.
So I doesn't count.
Yeah, some background. I worked previously, this is going back like 6 years ago, I worked for a large enterprise where they had 80,000 Macs, and we went down the road of joining them to AD, and it was a complete cluster. It was a disaster. They keep losing their domain bind. It ended up just making more sense to just manage them out of band versus using some kind of domain membership. So it's, as well as RDS and virtual desktop, server-based computing. That's typically what you'd see. Application delivery, that sort of stuff in the enterprise. This is all stuff that we know today. Big stuff here is standard, like I said, lockdown. Right. So these desktops are typically very locked down, tightly controlled. Users typically don't have admin rights. In some cases, I guess it's really use case driven, right? Because some cases admins are just like, shit, I don't want to deal with this. I'm just going to go ahead and give them admin rights, right? They don't want to take the time to run procmon and determine what kind of permissions they actually need.
Most of us probably the past 15 or so years have gone through that pain of actually getting users away from having admin rights. Is this fair to say? Everyone's gone through this experience. Today, it's pretty common, I think, that users just have standard admin rights. It's fairly easy to do. We don't have the same issues with applications that we've done previously. We're not having the same fights with users. It's a lot easier, I think, to manage an enterprise desktop than it was 10 to 15 years ago.
Yeah, so typically you have, SMB shares, right? And that's going to be for your user data and that sort of stuff, right? So we have that, typically where your actual user data is stored. When we get into the hybrid desktop, we're going to talk about how some of that data is moving towards the cloud and what that hybrid model looks like in a couple minutes.
Sure. So I don't want to be pedantic, and I apologise for interrupting the presentation. But so I want to go back to the Mac point, right? So domain joined, therefore it doesn't count. My view of the enterprise desktop is different because my view of the enterprise desktop, just because it's not a part of the domain, i.e. you don't have to authenticate using your domain credentials to actually open up the laptop, doesn't necessarily take away the fact that it's an enterprise desktop. Sure, my Mac, for example, isn't joined to the domain. It's not part of the corporate domain. Every single application I typically use on it, I need to authenticate using my domain credentials.
Yeah, so we're gonna get to that point. So hopefully, I would agree with that. Hopefully we're going to talk a little bit more about that kind of scenario, I think.
Yeah, and the domain join was kind of getting more towards like policy management. This was primarily focused on Windows, but because from a Mac perspective, back when I was doing the Mac management, you had to basically join it to Open Directory, and then there was a central policy engine. So it wasn't really good control on it from a Mac perspective. So that's why I mentioned that, but. Just like you said, there are a lot of Macs in the enterprise. They do have the ability to be enterprise managed. Enterprise desktops are more than just domain joined. They're corporate managed entities, right? So corporate owned. And in most cases, those Mac devices also have, they can have, data structures that are attached to it through map drives, that kind of stuff, corporate applications. So, yeah.
So it's not domain joined because you manage that machine?
No, just because it's easier for it not to be domain joined. But IT manage my antivirus. IT own the asset.
Okay.
They manage the antivirus. They control my access to Salesforce. They control my access to email. Control my access to Office 365. I mean, the only thing that's not technically enterprise on this map is the fact that I don't use my Active Directory username and password to authenticate.
So we're going to talk in a second about what we would define as what we see as a hybrid desktop, and I would class that as a hybrid desktop, even though it's as you say, it's an owned asset managed by centralized IT. but you're utilizing cloud resources on there. So you're not typically sticking, even though it's a Mac, you're not sticking with on-prem. I'm presuming you've got admin rights on the machine. So you've got control over updates on it. Do you control OS installs on it, things like that as well?
Yeah.
So I think even though, as you rightly say, it's an enterprise desktop, I think within our definition it fits more within what we would define as a hybrid desktop. So these, outside of that specific example, is anything else that we've missed? Anything that doesn't fit within this or would still count as an enterprise desktop? And this is pretty much what it's mostly been. Enterprise will be slow to upgrade.
Probably stick patching and updates.
Yeah, we have. So the next slide covers it. Yeah.
Yeah, so we've got, this is kind of defining the desktop from a high level. And then the software stack might have things like antivirus enforced. There might be DLP agents, there might be all sorts of things. And the session that
sort of stuff.
Yeah, monitoring agents. The session that Helga and I did was talking about the impact of those types of agents might have on an enterprise desktop. And then that application, or the applications on top of that desktop might be managed through config manager or even group policy or LAN desk or something like that, where the actual entire application lifecycle is managed by centralized IT. On top of that, in pretty much every environment is going to be some type of group policy, whether that's user-centric or machine-centric for application configuration. Some type of user environment management. That might be as simple as roaming profiles with group policy.
Yep.
Hopefully, most organizations are moving away from that type of management and moving into even group policy preferences and Microsoft UEV. But maybe even looking at the flexibility that you might get with third-party user environment management solutions. Pretty common across all of these enterprise desktops are going to be a set of dependencies. .NET Framework, Flash, Visual C runtimes, Java, any of these types of things. They might have some sort of VPN software or delivery of remote applications. VPN has typically been big because I need to get into my resources that are on-prem. Maybe some type of monitoring tools are certainly more prevalent in server-based computing and VDI environments, maybe not so much on physical desktops. And I hope that changes. I hope administrators see the value in actually monitoring the end-user experience on the endpoint, the physical endpoint as well, so they have real visibility into actually what's going on. Now, all of this stuff, the user doesn't care about. They have, user doesn't say, I want group policy or I want .NET Framework. They want their applications or they want their data. The IT administrator has to deliver all of this in an enterprise desktop just to give the user access to their applications. So let's talk a little bit about a hybrid desktop. So if we perhaps put some context around this, or some history around this, is probably not going to be new to anyone in the room. But since, say, 2007 and the introduction of real smartphones, as I would define it, not Symbian and Windows Mobile kind of devices, the consumerization essentially of IT is these types of mobile devices that are offering a great user experience because they are very prescriptive in their hardware and as well as the software, the OS and the software that's on top of it. App stores have certainly contributed to this, and as users have used these devices in their personal lives, they've been asking IT to bring them into the enterprise. And ISVs have then also been targeting these platforms as even enterprise applications or consumer applications that make sense in an enterprise context. And the next one? Yep.
Yeah, I'd just add too that the hybrid desktop is something, who's seeing some of this technology in the enterprise that they're working on today, right? So some of those things that you'd see as part of that hybrid desktop that was driving that hybrid desktop that we're talking about, we'll get into in a second, is consumers are bringing in, and a lot of the folks here have talked about in the past, right? They're bringing in consumer grade stuff because IT is too slow to deliver, right? So they're bringing in things like Dropbox and technologies like that, SaaS-based services that give them faster access to their stuff, right? And then IT's got to go around And you gotta then they go out and try to find an enterprise solution that can give them that same level of service, right? That faster delivery, tightly controlled delivery. So we see that as a big piece of what that hybrid desktop is. So we'll be getting into a little bit of that and kind of diving into some of the different solutions here in a second.
Some of those services I think are interesting too, because even though we've taken admin rights away from users, things like Dropbox I'm able to install without admin rights on my machine. A lot of these consumer-based apps, they must know that if they want to get into the enterprise, they've had to get around standard user rights. So both of us have certainly been using a number of services that have enabled a hybrid sort of solution. So I've not really used a corporate provisioned and managed device, whether that's a mobile, a PC, since I left Credit Suisse.
Okay, the last time I had a domain joined device.
So when I started at Credit Suisse back in 2010, I logged onto this machine and the first thing I saw was Internet Explorer 6. And I don't want to deal with this. So I thought, hey, I've got admin rights on the box. I'm going to upgrade it to Internet Explorer 7. So within 2 days in starting at Credit Suisse, I'd actually broken my machine by upgrading it to Internet Explorer 7. I was madly trying to fix the machine without having to tell anyone that I'd broken the machine. So needless to say, it was a frustrating experience. Since then, I've typically had a machine that I own, that I have control over. I control updates, I control the operating system that's on it, the applications that are on it, how I synchronize data. Even though I was working for an IT company, I was using Dropbox and OneDrive and things like that to hold corporate data, which is probably a bad thing. But since that time, I've been a user of services like Office 365, Salesforce, Okta for identity and things like that, and you're pretty much the same?
Same way, yeah. I mean, I haven't used a domain joined device since like back in 1999. No, it's probably like early 2000s. I mean, I pretty much always had most recently I had, I've been using Mac. Haven't had anything domain joined. All my services have been delivered via the cloud. So we use Office 365 internally. So we use Okta from an identity management perspective, something that we're digging into because that's something that we hear more and more from customers, and we'll drill into why that makes sense, why identity is so important when we're talking about the hybrid space. We use like other SaaS services like ConnectWise, and I've used Salesforce in the past at previous companies. So my desktop today consists of it's really a mashup of services. I have some stuff that's locally installed, some that's streamed, some of it's that's cloud hosted. So that's kind of how my experience has personally been.
I've been an Apple user, I think, since about 2010. I've been running some type of MacBook for that same length of time. My new employer is about to introduce a policy where they're going to enforce AV. So I'm only ever going to run any of their stuff inside of VM. I'm not going to ever have AV enforced on my host. It's probably a bad thing. Maybe I probably shouldn't admit to it, but I haven't really run AV since 2004. Generally turn it off. But I am a Mac user, but I'm also a Windows user. I have a Surface 3 because part of my role is talking to end customers about end user computing, so I need to be able to talk about the different experiences across all of those devices. And also being a Mac user has been interesting from a Microsoft perspective as well, is the improvement in applications support for operating systems other than Windows. So today, it's actually, I think, a pleasure to be able to use Office 2016 on OS X. The features parity is almost there. There's even a new object model, so add-ins are now cross-platform. Yep. Add-ins that work on Windows, work on OS X, work in the browser, which is amazing. Anything for you?
I'm on the same page. I mean, he's got parallels, but I personally use VM Fusion, and then pretty much since I've been going Office 365, the experience, all the feature parity is still different. That's one of the things we'll talk about as far as gaps when we talk about the hybrid desktop. As applications start to become more and more cross-platform, is the feature parity on the Mac isn't quite there 100% of what you'd see on the PC. Things like OneNote and they just recently, as Aaron said, added the add-ins for Outlook. But yeah, I use Fusion pretty much for Visio. As soon as they move Visio off, I don't really use the PC for too much anymore. Sometimes I want to throw my Mac on the floor, but other times actually it's more user-friendly. So apps are really, it's the same thing here. It's a mashup of services and sometimes, yeah, go ahead.
So I really like this presentation. It's great, by the way.
So this is it. We don't really have anything else.
I've met a customer just this week. They gave it a completely different name. They didn't call it a hybrid desktop, but fundamentally the same thing. The question I've got for all of us in the room is, because we are techies and in IT ourselves, there's me in the same boat as you are. You know, does that blinker our view on the world a little bit, right?
Yes, absolutely.
Because you say you haven't used antivirus since 2004, right?
Yep.
And,
Right, we're talking from an IT
join our
perspective.
machines
Yeah.
to the domain and your local admins.
Yep.
We're a little bit blinkered, so I think we've just got to remember that.
Yes, I would absolutely agree with that. I've been in, it's been my machine, not an enterprise machine that's been given to me. So I've been in control of it. As I say, I've been controlling the OS, the configuration, the applications and everything. So yes, I'm absolutely blinkered. I've been able to define my experience, even though I'm connecting to resources that are defined by the organization that I'm working for.
Yeah.
But the end user experience is my end user experience.
Yeah.
And it's certainly power users, CIO or CXO perhaps, maybe doing the same types of thing. Anyone who can stamp their foot loud enough can probably get the same type of thing.
I think it depends on the sector too that you work in, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That makes a huge difference, right?
Yeah,
we're federal or
We've had this conversation is working for tech IT companies, we have choice that many other users and organizations organization does.
I mean, I wrote down a note just on your AV comment, which is you want your own run AV in a VM. And that's because you work for a tech company.
Yeah.
The reality is, if that's now your company standard, then you have a contract. And if something happens as a result of you not running AV, you violate that contract. And in a lot of organizations, you're liable to get sued, prosecuted in some cases. So I agree with Simon. I think our view is very good.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. It's a good comment. Yep. So a technical deck isn't anything without a couple of definitions. So I put these are my definitions around hybrid. And so the first one is business consumers connecting to cloud-hosted resources and traditional on-prem apps and data from any devices. Now, the key piece here is business consumer. So it's not going to be someone typically sitting on a manufacturing floor, for example. Business consumer is exactly what we've just been talking about. We are business consumers. CXO level is business consumers. Management level is probably business consumer. Anyone who, I guess their work is probably not defined by where they work. It's the types of devices and applications and giving them the ability to work from any location. The second one then, and this will be key, I think, as we talk about the different components of what we see as hybrid is the administrator experience. So the administrator having the ability to manage on-prem resources and cloud-hosted resources, especially for those organizations that are moving from hybrid to cloud, or they have been traditionally on-prem and they are consuming cloud resources. If you are a Greenfield environment, and I'm working with a customer at the moment who is the only thing they're going to have on-prem are physical PCs and routers. All their management's done in the cloud, but if you are in that migration mode, you need to be able to manage, especially identity, on-prem and cloud identity in the same manner.
So based on that definition, who here is managing a hybrid type environment? You? Okay.
Is that
A couple people?
that
Jason was. Cool. Well, just real quick, just 'cause I didn't realize it's already 25 minutes, right? But just real quick, I'm just curious from your perspective, what pieces are hybrid in your environment? 365, okay. Okay. Is it, so okay, enterprise file sync, share file? Okay. Cool. All right, yeah, I was just curious.
You can take this?
Yeah, so I think the Greenfield, you got a great story for this. I don't know if we have time to run into it, but Greenfield Startup, as Aaron just said, I mean, his story essentially is basically, he's started recently working for a company. They're investing a lot of time in Azure AD, Office 365, some of the newer technologies that are out there, and it's Greenfield, so they're actually going, if I'm not mistaken, they're no on-prem AD. Everything's in the cloud, Office or Azure AD, right? And then they're doing...
So the primary resource is Office 365, but they have a project application that will be managed in Azure Compute. So to do that, we need to build AD in Azure. We need to build SQL servers and servers to host this application. AD synchronizes to Azure AD. Azure AD then synchronizes or provisions accounts in Office 365, eventually ShareFile, and they've got a couple of already using a couple of other SaaS-based applications, so we'll synchronize those or federate those accounts together. And even from a Windows 10 perspective, we're looking at how do we get a device onto the user's desktop and provision it without anything on-prem. So that means, in this case, using Windows Intune, and with Windows 10 using the new provisioning solution to be able to open the box up, provision it, get it into a desired configuration state, essentially, and then roll that in the MDM solution.
I'd say the business units, go ahead. You had a question?
Do you think the cadence of Windows 10 updates is going to drive us away from the enterprise desktop?
It's going to be in the short term, it's going to be a lot of pain. So I've been talking to customers, as I said, so I've done 3 workshops so far, and these organizations, 2 of them were not using software assurance. One of them was using Altiris, one was using something or other, and both of them were trying to get away from that solution. One was using Altiris and it was broken. One was using Case but wants to get away from it. The other one has just rolled out System Center Configuration Manager and is covered with software assurance. The guys without software assurance are going to have some pain depending on the types of features that they want in it and the control they want over the desktop. All 3 of them are going to have to improve the maturity of their processes in managing the desktop. Not necessarily the technology, the processes that they have, and to be fair, I don't think they're that mature. So to date, if you could have been rolling out Windows 7, Windows 8 in almost the same level of cadence as you're getting with Windows 10, I don't think Windows 10 necessarily changes the approach. You just have more defined level of updates that are coming. So with Windows 7, you still had SP1 and some roll-ups. You still had Windows 8, you still had Windows 8.1, but these organizations were just going, let's do it once a year, let's do it once every 18 months. Windows 10 is going to force you to do it every 3 to 4 months, every 6 months. At a minimum, you'll be rolling out an update, a major update to Windows 10 every 12 months. And for some organizations, that's going to be very difficult.
Yeah, so just going through this pretty quick here, because time's going kind of quick, but from a business unit perspective, I mean, that's one of the things that I personally seen is that the different business units inside of the enterprise are really driving how you're driving the enterprise to actually move towards this hybrid model. So folks, from the different departments, whether it's marketing or sales, they're finding these quicker and faster tools, and they're bringing those in, and the enterprise is then looking for some way to control that, right? There's also business units this doesn't make sense for. That's why we call it use cases and scenarios, because I think everyone's going to eventually move toward this hybrid model. For certain services, not all services make sense. I think personally that hybrid's really going to be the way for a long time. But some units, I got a customer, for instance, it's a fragrance company. They basically have tightly controlled desktops. There's just no way, just with the compliance that they have, that they can move towards this model. They moved one piece, and that one piece that we're working on right now is 365. And then the next step is they have performance challenges with 365. So we worked with FS Logics in that scenario. But point being is that not everyone can move towards this model. It's going to be small pieces at a time. That's kind of getting into the migration piece, right? So how are you going to move towards this model? I think personally that 365 is going to drive people to start feeling the most comfortable about this, and then other services will then follow on. Enterprise file sync services, people are getting much more comfortable with things like ShareFile that are in that control plane hybrid model. So I think as people have data migrations and they have projects that are migration based, they're gonna look at as that migration comes up, does it make sense for me? You're gonna do an analysis at that point. Does it make sense for me to move towards this model? So I think those are gonna help drive this, and then obviously mobility, right? I think that one kind of speaks for itself. I mean, mobility in the sense of, people need access to their applications and their data from anywhere, and I think the security aspect of that and how EMM plays into that, and then most recently what we're seeing with some of these identity providers, where actually VMware actually has a nice story. I don't know if anyone looked at their workspace one stuff that they're doing. But a single portal, you have access to your SaaS apps, you have access to your Win32 apps, and you have access to your native mobile apps or wrapped apps, all with a single sign-on. Citrix is moving towards that direction, but I see that as mobility is going to help drive that, because they want to be able to have access to their data both locally and as well as what's on in the cloud. So
the portal cycle keeps going around every 5 or so years, doesn't it? We'll get portals and then it fails, and then someone says we need portals again. So we'll see what happens in the next few years. So let's try and get through the next slide at least. Quickly, here we go. Okay, so what do we need to do to build hybrid environments? So we're going to need a few key pieces. The first of that is identity management. From a user perspective, I want one identity for all of the services that I access. If it was all on-prem services, that would be fairly straightforward. But now if I'm mixing in cloud services, I need to ensure that I have some type of synchronization or federation between those services. So hybrid is, by definition, as we see it at least, is going to involve some type of cloud-based service or some type of public application that you have nothing to do with other than consuming it. Allowing the user to have device platform or the device choice and the platform of their choice, as we've just shown through our experience. It's potentially enabler of BYOD. Many of the organisations I've spoken to perhaps do BYOD for mobile phones, but corporate delivered or PCs and laptops, or desktops and laptops might be still corporate owned.
Yeah, then what I see with some of the corporate owned stuff, just real quick, I'll actually see they'll try to give the customer or the end users more options. So they'll go and buy the new Macs and they'll have Surfaces and kind of newer, more hip devices to say, but they're still corporate owned and corporate managed, right? So it's almost a hybrid of a BYOD.
Of course, in that there's going to be legacy applications, and I may choose server-based computing or VDI to deliver those, or I may even still put them onto the physical PC device, depending on the way my business works or the way where the data for those applications exists. Some type of file sync solution. We've spoken about Dropbox, but it might be ShareFile, OneDrive, and a number of others.
And I think the thing from a file sync perspective, I think when we're talking about hybrid, we need to look at the file sync solutions that actually give the ability, solutions similar to ShareFile, that give you the ability to actually have connectors to your on-prem data as well as data that's hosted in the public cloud as well. So
yeah, so in this context, consuming something like just Dropbox doesn't help you get from what you've got on-prem into the cloud. Dropbox doesn't really help.
I have a question. Do you think that ShareFile's Google-like multiple users on one document functionality is going to get held back because it requires Office 365?
No, because everyone's moving to Office 365 anyway.
Yeah, from my understanding, the 365 integration is it's native, so it's not, you don't have to necessarily have a 365 license. They have the text so you can actually edit it. They're using their engine basically to allow you to collaborate on the ShareFile platform.
Yeah, I think it's just the Office web apps. You don't necessarily have to have Office 365 to collaborate in ShareFile, I think.
You can get Office online.
Yeah, you can put your Office online, your Office web applications in your own network if you want to. Some type of enterprise mobility management, and this is extending into desktop operating systems as well. OS 10 and Windows 10, you can both manage pretty much completely with some type of mobility solution. And then Shane can talk about the OpEx model.
Yeah, it's just something that I'm seeing from a lot of the SaaS-based servers have drove this through the enterprise, is that they're moving towards, enterprises are getting more and more familiar to the OpEx model where they're paying monthly for services. And with that, they're getting used to paying that per user licensing, right? And so things like, which was a big shift, is Office in general has been device. So with the 365, it swapped to that user model. So I think organizations in general are definitely getting more used to paying the OpEx model. Again, every organization is different, but a hybrid model typically is going to have your services that are cloud hosted are going to be in that OpEx. Go ahead.
So one of the things that I'm noticing when I talk to our customers is that they say that they're much happier moving to an OpEx model, but there's a lot of hidden costs that they don't have to take out of their budget when you're talking on-prem, on power, cooling, facilities. And then when you get rid of those costs and you move them into an OpEx model, people think it's really expensive and it brings to the fore how much they're spending in black and white. People find that difficult.
It becomes a much more visible cost.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's all right. That's all that guys and previously, you had building and maintenance and power and all that sort of stuff where that was not the IT budget. So it's transferring the expense between budgetary parts.
Yeah, so for the video Jim was just talking about customers he's been speaking to where the view of their budgets essentially changing. A lot of these hidden costs potentially, or costs are transferred between different types of, if we move from a CapEx to an OpEx model, it's surfacing up what IT actually costs.
Yep, yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, I'm also seeing too is like, so we actually had a customer recently where they were looking to put everything in our infrastructure as a service platform. And what we ended up doing instead is we worked out kind of a hybrid model where we actually got them on a Nutanix platform locally, and then we basically took all the OpEx stuff, or all the operational components basically, and that became their OpEx. They were paying us monthly for all the software and the operational management stuff that's on top of that, but they bought the hardware up front because that was easier for them from an accounting perspective, and that they own it. They own that going forward and then can depreciate it. So.
But then they have to maintain it too.
So we maintain everything. All they do is bought it. We basically deliver them a block, right? Our managed boom, right? So they own it, but we're managing all that stuff on top of it. So they don't have to even touch it.
So in the time that we have left, let's dig into some of these a little bit more, in more detail. First, identity management. So from an administrator perspective, the administrator needs to be able to provision accounts and manage identities across all of their different services. So they will go and look at things like Azure AD, which if you're consuming any Microsoft cloud-based service, you have Azure AD by default, and you can upgrade that into a couple of different tiers. But you may also look at things like Okta and Centrify and so on. And the idea being is that from a user point of view, that if I have all my services spread out all over the place, I get great user experience by just having one identity to access all of those. Even if it's as simple as just synchronizing passwords, it's not actually a federation of identities between those services.
Identity in general is kind of the heart of your organization, right? So seeing that these identity solutions it's not just single sign-on, it's provisioning that user across all those different services and then deprovisioning that user when they leave the organization. Because we have so many services that are going to be brought into the enterprise, you need something like an Okta that's going to do that SSO, but as well as that provisioning and deprovisioning of those services and managing the changing of the passwords for the apps that don't support things like SAML and stuff like that.
So this one's, I think, interesting around user environment management. It's in two pieces, right? It's the user preferences and it's the policies that I might define around those. And if I'm delivering a hybrid desktop, I'm also perhaps delivering or enabling users who are disconnected from the corporate network for extended periods of time. So I don't know yet whether the same user environment management approaches that we've been using in legacy or traditional enterprise environments will work in a hybrid desktop. What's interesting, I think, from a profile perspective, Microsoft has built in roaming into Windows 10. It only works for core Windows components and universal apps. And I can synchronize either via my Microsoft ID, or if I go out and purchase Azure AD Premium, I can use enterprise state roaming to roam with my Azure AD account. And that synchronizes over HTTP because that user can be anywhere. And I think that's certainly key from a user perspective. I think for most of the existing user environment management solutions, a policy will work fairly well. A machine probably doesn't have to check in constantly to be able to get configuration updates. And for those solutions that either you may still have VPNs to get configuration updates, but those solutions that perhaps can cloudify themselves so that they can enable use cases where desktops are just not on-prem, they're not connected to the domain, they're out out in the field and anywhere so that they can get configuration updates.
And I'd say one of the things I think we're starting to see too is the convergence of the traditional EST delivery type solutions, the things like, System Center, Landesk. These things are they're all doing MDM type stuff. Microsoft's got Intune, Landesk has their solution. And I think these policy engines are going to start converging personally, and they're not there today. So the traditional group policy and things like that over time are going to transition into what I think personally is the that more mobility management platform. So things today like Zen Mobile and Intune, they can manage certain settings on top of Windows 10, on top of Mac. So I think that's all going to converge. You're not going to have two separate products. So that's my.
From an application licensing perspective, a key enabler for a hybrid desktop is going to be moving to user-based licensing. So Microsoft has been drag kicking and screaming, I guess. Even Office and now Windows is going to be, if you're doing Office 365, you have a user-based license. So this is absolutely key because the user gets their machine that they probably carry around with them, but they can also have the same applications on their mobile device, or even might be like myself, have my main machine with a number of VMs on it, plus also another machine that I can move between. So from an administrator point of view, it's a lot easier for me now to track licensing based on a user-based model. There we go.
Stuff?
Yeah. Devices. So I've touched briefly on device provisioning. So it's probably a mix of, say, enterprise mobility, and Windows 10 I think Microsoft has been doing something interesting with Windows 10 and enabling device provisioning without any infrastructure required. So I can email the user the provisioning file, or I can put the provisioning file on a USB stick, and I can provision the machine out of the box and enroll it in my MDM solution. And I can do that similarly from an OS 10 perspective. Machine level policy enforcement, if you're still tied to group policy, there's an interesting solution called Policy Pack there that can actually deliver group policy from the cloud, even from non-domain joined machines, which is kind of weird. The big one there is disk encryption. So these customers that I've been talking to about Windows 10, they've got a number of machines that have quite different ages, so probably going back about 5 years. At least the machines that are probably 2 years old and less are all going to be enabled for UEFI and have some type of TPM, at least TPM 1.2 in it. So what I'm encouraging these customers to do, and if you're in consulting or if you are a customer, I would absolutely encourage your customers to be doing the same thing, is enabling disk encryption across the board. Don't make it optional, just go and do it. It's in Windows 10 Pro and above. Pretty much every machine now has a TPM. Pretty much every machine has UEFI. So as you're rolling out Windows 10, everything should be UEFI enabled, everything should be TPM enabled, and disk encryption enabled on the device. And this is key to protecting data at rest if I'm using enterprise file and sync solutions.
Yep. And key thing there is data at rest, right? So when we dig into, in a second here, the enterprise file sync, that's one of the things that was actually recently announced at Synergy, right, is information rights management, right? So you have data at rest, but someone can just, as soon as they can take that file, they can go ahead and email it, right? So as soon as it's off the machine, it's no longer, it's in transit at that point, and it's off the machine, and you're able to get access to that content, right? Technology is basically like information rights management solutions. So Microsoft has that kind of native built in, but ShareFile, I think it's called Secular, I think was the name of the company that they are working with, right? So basically they're working with that type of company where they can actually, the permissions and the authorization of that file basically travels with the file. So they can't actually get access to that file until they authenticate to ShareFile. Office 365 has that built in. So when you send files around, you have to authenticate to 365 prior to getting access to those applications. So I think that IRM is a key piece when we're talking about the hybrid desktop.
But rights management and data leakage prevention, because these are built into certain tiers of Office 365, and you have obviously third-party solutions. I don't think these features are very well understood by the business. Perhaps it's a checkbox, but they don't really understand that if I can protect the information, the rights to that information travels with that information, as I'm using file and sync solutions more and more, file and sync solution might give the ability for me to send you a link to a document and password protected, but as soon as you download it, it's unprotected. So at least the conversations I'm having, I'm finding that these features are not really well understood. And from a file and sync perspective, I've touched on this previously, for these customers moving from hybrid to cloud, they need a solution that gives them the ability to connect to both on-prem resources and cloud at the same time. So entirely on-prem solutions are great because I can enable cloud type or anywhere access from my on-prem storage. But as more and more stuff moves to cloud-based solutions, those file and sync need to be able to enable both scenarios.
And be optimized to work with technologies like virtual desktop, server-based computing, because technologies like OneDrive, some of these things don't have selective file sync, don't work well with in roaming scenarios, non-persistent desktops. So a marching band is coming. That's pretty good. Okay. All right. Yeah. Let me cover that.
So from an application perspective, what's really interesting, I'm not sure, other than Intune, it must be able to do it. With Windows 10, I can enroll a Windows 10 device in Windows Intune and deploy Win32 applications to it. I know AirWatch can do something similar, but that is, I think that's kind of mind-blowing, is I don't have to put an agent on this device. I can auto-enroll it in MDM and I can start delivering Win32 apps to it. Like, that's insane.
Windows 10 is one huge agent.
Yeah.
That's a great point, yeah.
I mean, so people might be worried about getting to Windows 10 and the amount of work it's going to involve in getting them to it, but the Windows 10 is just an enabler for making our lives easier and hopefully eventually the cost of the business smaller. I think Microsoft's got a very interesting solution with Configuration Manager in Intune. I don't yet know whether anyone can do the same type of thing, where I can integrate traditional on-prem PC management, patch management, application deployment and so on with enterprise mobility solution and even view them through the same console. And a deep provisioning, this is probably important, I think, for user-owned devices. Certainly easy from mobile devices, iPhones, Android and so on, something we've been doing for a while now. But even OS 10, Windows 10, you're able to do the same types of things. Windows 10 with the anniversary update is introducing enterprise data protection, EDP, so I can actually wrap policies around the types of applications and data that are on my device, just like I can do on an iPhone. I can separate the types of applications and data as well.
And just one more point here. I know we're getting towards the end here, but I just wanted to mention that you saw updates or updating those applications. When we're talking about the hybrid model, I think layering's been a topic for a long time, and it's just obviously I think this last year you're seeing a lot more vendors that are doing those types of solutions, which is awesome. We're accelerating application delivery. When you talk about taking those models right outside of the virtual desktop server-based computing to physical PCs, right, and then taking it also offline. Like, how do you get someone that's outside of your enterprise and update those applications? There's technologies out there like Turbo that can enable some of those things, but the traditional layering type technologies aren't doing that today. So it's also important to think down the road about updating those applications outside of the enterprise when they're not in your domain there. So gaps and challenges. So this is kind of, we were just thinking at the end, like, okay, so there's a lot of stuff we're talking about. There's Jim.
So I took a look at the UMessent cloud paging solution fairly recently.
Which one?
UMessent.
Okay. Cloud paging. Oh, is that it's similar to Turbo? They were at the
Application jukebox it used to be called.
Similar in concept.
Okay. Yeah, I think they're at the UK Bright Forum, but
Yeah. So they can do that with non-domain joins and updating and layering apps in.
Nice.
Outside your enterprise.
Okay, cool. Yeah, that's awesome. And so I hope to see more solutions doing things similar like that.
So yeah, we got Turbo in that list down the bottom, but not UMessent.
Yeah, we have to look at that. So things we were kind of talking like, okay, so how do we, what kind of gaps are we seeing with all these mashup of services that we're getting from the cloud-hosted SaaS-based apps, Win32 apps, mobile devices? What kind of things are we seeing? So the first thing was kind of user experience. We're seeing, things like, just use the big one, right, Office 365. If you look at things like OneDrive, 5 minutes, we got to work. All right, we're doing good. I forgot because this timer started before. All right, so I'll slow down. So things like search across, so user experience, so things like, plugin support, which is getting fixed, things like if you look at feature parity between Windows and Mac, it's just completely different. So they're getting better, but there's definitely feature parity across those different platforms, very different. Search is a big one. I mean, I know there's vendors out there that do that, but when you start looking at searching across all these different services that you have, I think that's an area that can get a lot better. I think it was called VirtualWorks. The original founder of Citrix, Ed Akabuchi, I think he started a company. It was actually down in Florida. It was called VirtualWorks. So it was on the premise of doing something like that, being able to search across all your different services, because when you have all these different applications and they're all over the place, search is going to be a key thing. So I think that's lacking.
Did you just use the word premise in the right context there?
What did I say?
No, you did. You did.
Oh, I did.
You
Oh,
said it
shit.
on
I was
the
like,
on the
dude, I'm gonna
premise.
get jumped over here.
No, it was good. That was good.
Okay, thank you. All right. So device.
Tough crowd.
Yeah, I know. I just like went blank. I'm like, what's going on?
You can say SIFTs in the right context.
So yeah, so I usually suck at grammar, so I'm glad I made that. Awesome, man. So device downtime, I think, is something that I forgot. Actually, I forgot our point with that. It was something about getting.
Well, if users on a device, especially if this is a user-owned device,
That's what it was. Yeah.
and if they're a road warrior or wherever it is they're out and about, if this device goes down, they can probably fall back to their phone, but what do? Are they going to have to come back into the office? Do they go down and just go and pick up a PC from Best Buy or whatever it is and re-enroll everything? They could potentially do that. But yeah, I think if it's, especially mobile devices, they're going to be relying on that device. So if something happens to it, potentially they could be not working.
I think our ability to get up and running quicker. Like as an example, I was doing a boot camp for a customer. It was a couple weeks back, and I was driving. I was kind of last minute fixing up the slide deck, and then I opened up my laptop as I was getting in the car, and my laptop wouldn't start. So I was like, holy crap! That's my presentation. I'm screwed. And then I remembered, I use ShareFile, right? So I went and I was able to get my ShareFile, my OneNote, everything set up on one of their laptops and get everything delivered within probably 10-minute time frame. So it's pretty cool to have that functionality. So, and the other thing, performance challenges, which I think we're seeing, like you look at 365 as these things are hosted in the cloud, and then you have things like Outlook, right? When it's typically in online mode because you're not really supposed to have the cache locally. They support it, but in very high performing environments, right? So there's technologies that can help with stuff like that. One particularly that recently is FS Logic, so I'm personally working with, which is pretty cool. There's other technologies like, and I haven't tested it, but Unidesk is doing kind of like hot add container. We have to test that stuff and see as you're able to containerize these things, how that's going to help with some of this stuff as well. So, and services sprawl, right? It's the next slide we just kind of threw up there. There's just so much stuff, right? Even, we were in a meeting the other day, it's like Slack, Podio, web chat, email. It's just so many different services across the spectrum. It starts to get kind of crazy. And that's, I guess, for me, thinking more from a consumer perspective, right? Because the enterprise has to control that. So you don't have, I guess it's kind of like, it goes hand in hand, right? Because you want to control it, but at the same time, you want to give the users choice. So you have to make sure you have some sort of policy management around that. But we just thought that was, just as we're kind of thinking through stuff, so.
So I think that we've finally come to the end of our presentation. So just to cover or go back to what we've covered again, we sort of set the scene with the enterprise desktop. We've defined what we see as a hybrid desktop. So we've got some feedback on that. It'd be interesting to sort of continue that conversation. Talked about our own user experience, which I'm sure is similar user experience to most other people in the room. Defining what hybrid is and we'll talk through some of those scenarios, and with 40-something minutes, it's a conversation you could have on each one of those topics for a whole presentation just on each of those. And then how to manage the modern user experience. So with that, thank you. Question over here?
Yeah, one thing, I live in a different world now. I work for the other guys, and I see more and more of this Type 2 hypervisor being leveraged for containers on endpoints. I've even got a customer that is delivering OS 10 to a Type 2 hypervisor on a Mac to deliver it as a managed OS.
Wow.
So in the context of the hybrid desktop, there's consideration for the Type 2 hypervisor. There's consideration for ongoing layered management, data management of that endpoint as well. And people are going crazy over it.
Yeah, I mean, that's essentially
an active market.
That's essentially what I do. I have my machine. I have 2 VMs on it. I've got OS 10 where I have pretty much all my personal stuff. I have a Windows 10 VM that's on the Windows Insider track, and it's got everything's up to date, bleeding edge. And then I have my enterprise VM that's on current branch for business. It's got policies in it, AV and all that kind of stuff, yeah.
So what these customers are doing is they're setting up an authentication process and they put the image in Dropbox. Or they localize the image to a file share in India. And then they set the policy up for the authentication and the user gets routed to the geographic destination for the download.
Leveraging the content delivery.
That's right, so
from-
they're putting it in a regional context and then they're wrapping this whole thing with policy. Hey, maybe that machine only works on the wireless card when it's on a particular subnet. Or what am I doing to control the VM in terms of input, output, clipboard, drive, all the rest.
Citrix is going to have to rethink Zen client strategy.
Yeah. What strategy?
That's
Yeah. So
What you say there though is critical, right? Because you're absolutely right, but the difference is the organisation controls the policies around those VMs. In other words, the user can't escape.
Yep.
Aaron's situation was different, right? Because you've got your own enterprise VM.
You're the
and
BY.
it's there that you have corporate data outside that VM. In his environment, that can't happen. So again, it comes down to violations of policies and stuff like that. And I don't think just active directory policies, I mean, employment contracts, data security policies that you sign, by that role.
There's a whole presentation right on just that piece of it, I guess, yeah. So yeah, we should wrap it up and say thank you very much.
Yep.